When life closes in around you and every path seems to disappear, most people panic, shut down, or assume something has gone terribly wrong. But every once in a while, a moment arrives that gently reminds us that being blocked is not the end. It's often the quiet beginning of something new. This story begins with a man who believed his entire future had collapsed in just one afternoon. For 10 long, exhausting years, he had poured everything into his small business. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it paid the bills and gave him a sense of purpose. Then, without warning, a sudden financial downturn forced him to close his doors. In a single moment, the life he built dissolved. Bills piled up, his savings evaporated, and the question "what now?" echoed in every corner of his mind. Unable to think clearly, he decided to take a walk along an old nature trail he used to visit as a teenager. He hoped the fresh air would settle the storm inside him. As he followed the winding path, he came across a massive boulder cracked almost invisibly down the middle. Nothing unusual, just another stone. But then he noticed something small, something green, something alive. A tiny plant was forcing its way through that narrow crack. The space was so tight he could barely slide a fingernail through it, and yet this fragile stem had found its way upward toward the sunlight. He stopped walking. For a moment, the world became incredibly quiet. He remembered reading in an article long ago that plants don't choose the easiest path. They choose the direction where the slightest hint of light appears, even if the journey is slow and full of resistance. And as he stared at the small plant fighting its way through stone, something clicked. Life blocking your path doesn't necessarily mean you've reached a dead end. Sometimes it means life is nudging you, gently or sharply, toward a new direction you never would have chosen on your own. That realization hit him harder than the loss of his business. For years, he had believed that if one plan failed, he failed with it. But everywhere around him, life told a different story. People lose jobs, relationships, routines, stability, yet somehow they rebuild. Behavioral experts often note that the people who thrive aren't always the strongest or most talented. They're the ones willing to pivot, adjust, and start again without viewing change as defeat. The little plant wasn't pushing through stone because the path was easy. It was pushing because the light was on the other side. As he continued walking, he began replaying the last decade of his life. All the hours he spent building his business felt wasted at first. But then another thought came: what if they weren't? What if those years were training, not failure? When he returned home, he grabbed a notebook and wrote down every skill he had gained over the years: communicating with customers, budgeting, negotiation, time management, scheduling, networking, and product planning. The list felt surprisingly long. The more he wrote, the more something inside him softened. His business hadn't collapsed because he was worthless. It collapsed because circumstances changed, and he could change with them. According to many career studies, people often find their most meaningful work after an unexpected setback, not before it. Some of the most successful American entrepreneurs, artists, and innovators built their life's greatest achievements following moments of complete collapse. That pattern repeats everywhere, in careers, finances, relationships, even personal growth. The moment everything falls apart is often the moment life is preparing you to rebuild stronger. So the man took one small step. Nothing dramatic. Nothing heroic. He simply reached out to 3 people he used to work with, not to ask for help, but to let them know he was exploring new opportunities. To his surprise, 2 of them responded immediately with connections. One even said he had been meaning to ask for help on a project, but didn't know the man was available. None of these opportunities were perfect, but they created something crucial: momentum. Psychologists say that early momentum, no matter how small, is the first sign of emotional recovery after disappointment. Even tiny progress gives you back a sense of control. And control creates hope. With each week, he began taking on freelance work, learning new tools, and experimenting with fresh ideas. Some attempts failed. Others worked better than expected. What changed wasn't the world, it was his willingness to reroute instead of resist. Months later, he built a new service, one that combined everything he had learned over the years but with a clarity he lacked before. This wasn't a desperate attempt to survive. It was a thoughtful, balanced effort to rebuild. And this time, he understood that his worth wasn't tied to a single outcome. He was more adaptable than he gave himself credit for. And just like the plant pushing through that stone, he realized growth doesn't always look dramatic at first. Sometimes it's slow, quiet, almost invisible, one grain of progress at a time. As the years passed, he carried the memory of that tiny plant with him. He shared the story with his children, his neighbors, colleagues, anyone who told him they felt stuck. If a plant can push through solid rock, he would say, imagine what a human heart can do when it refuses to give up. And those words resonated, especially in a world where uncertainty feels like a constant companion, where people worry about jobs, inflation, relationships, health, and the unpredictability of life. Modern life often convinces us that if things don't work out smoothly, then they weren't meant for us. But history shows the opposite. Many of the greatest breakthroughs, inventions, and life changes begin with broken expectations. It's important to understand that moving forward doesn't always mean pushing harder. Sometimes it means changing your angle, just like the plant shifted toward the light. Resilience isn't always bold or dramatic. Most of the time, it's quiet. It shows up in decisions no one sees, the choice to try again tomorrow, to learn something new, to ask for support, to keep believing there's still a path ahead even when everything feels uncertain. Experts in emotional well-being often say that reframing obstacles as redirections helps lower stress and improves problem-solving over time. It doesn't guarantee a perfect result, but it does help rebuild confidence. And confidence, even in small doses, is powerful fuel. So it's okay if your progress feels slow. Slow progress is still movement. The plant didn't break through the stone in a single day. It grew millimeter by millimeter, season after season, until one day it stood in the open air, stronger than anyone would have imagined. Eventually, the man's life stabilized, not because fate magically corrected itself, but because he learned to reinterpret the roadblocks in front of him. A blocked path wasn't a dead end. It was a sign, sometimes a gentle nudge, other times a hard shove, that another path existed, hidden from view, waiting for him to notice. And whenever life felt heavy again, he would picture that tiny stem breaking through the impossible. So when life blocks your path, and it will at some point, remember this story. Remember that you too can grow through the tightest spaces. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it begins as a single step taken on a hard day. Sometimes it's the willingness to believe that your story is still unfolding. And just like that little plant, you might discover that the path that disappeared was the one too small for you, and the new direction life is guiding you toward is the place where you're finally meant to grow. And that is something truly worth remembering.